Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Tracy Stein, and as always, I am so excited to be here with you today. So, you've probably noticed that the theme of this podcast really is meeting interesting people and learning about their aha moments that led them to make some sort of choice that changed their lives for the better. They share what they've learned with us so that we can learn to feel better, do better, and just live better in general. And who doesn't want that? So today's guest is in line with that theme, and I think you'll really enjoy her. She's super relatable and has some terrific advice and information to share with us. Her name is Eliza Wong. She's actually not only an executive coach and a sought after speaker, she's a transformational leadership expert. She's worked with some of the biggest names in the tech industry, and she's author of the book that actually is just hot off the presses as we speak. It's called Living on Purpose: 5 Deliberate Choices to Realize Fulfillment and Joy. Now, Amy will go over tips and techniques that can be helpful for us so that we can really find out what it is we truly want for ourselves and start making those changes so that our lives are more in line with what really resonates with us. And we'll talk about examples even of how we can feel out of the flow or not in line with what we want. And you probably didn't know this, but we talked briefly about why lottery winners often are less happy than the rest of us. Strange, right? You wouldn't think that. But oftentimes we work for things, or we think we need things, and then we need the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and we're living in the future, and we keep on striving for different types of achievement or specific goals, and yet we're still not happier. So Amy will explain why and what we can do to really align with what we truly want for ourselves, what will make us feel the most fulfilled and joyful. And really just the title, Living on Purpose, makes complete sense. And you'll see why by the end of the interview. But again, if you like the episode, please remember to like, share, and follow. Leave me a comment. And without further ado, let's get to the interview. Amy, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today. I love when people talk about things that can help us feel better, live better, do better. And your book really is all about that. So welcome.
Thank you. It's truly a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So there's so much for us to cover. But I was wondering if you might want to start with talking a little bit about yourself and your journey and your aha moment that led you ultimately to the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a leadership coach, and I work with a lot of leaders and teams on all things growth, transformation, and flow. And that's what I do now. And I've been doing this for about 10 years. And I didn't start here. I had no idea that I'd be doing this at this point in my life. My journey has brought me to this place. And I'm certain that the reason I do this work is because of what my genuine passion is, that has been true for me since I could talk. I mean, I have memories at such an early age, just fascinated with all things existence, fascinated with this idea that, thinking could be causative, fascinated with consciousness the moment consciousness was available as a concept to me as a child. And so those things really drove me and motivated me. And I was very passionate. And I think that's what prompted me to become so passionate about math, really, truly became obsessive about math. And so I studied that in high school and college. And I went to UC Berkeley and I got my degree in math. I was also a musician. And so very, very, very passionate about music. And, looking back, I can see that really it's a search for, and it's an experience of a kind of language and truth of this universe. And so that's how I experienced it at that point in my life. And then when I graduated from Cal, I ended up in the tech industry. I think it was just because of my competency with all things STEM, and I really loved it. And I was at Sun Microsystems for 10 years, and I ended up in many different roles. And I think the only two divisions I didn't experience there at that company was sales and finance, but everything else I got a really good experience of. And I would continually find myself in these roles where I was the go-between between, say, development and end user. And so I was really good at translating what was going on and articulating complex concepts in a way that people could hear and that people would then take action on. And I started to realize, oh, that's what I was doing in high school and in college, actually, because back in high school and college, I taught math and I loved it. Oh my goodness. I taught math and piano, and that love of teaching, it wasn't, yes, it was for the topic, but really what I was so enthralled with was just witnessing how it was that people took information in, and to be able to discern what it was that they didn't know that they didn't know. And I could hear that in their logic. I could hear that in their argument. I could see it in their body language. And I was fascinated with that. And I think I realized then at Sun, I was like, wow, that's what really drives me. And so then after I had my first child, who is going to be 14 in a couple of weeks, which is just wild to me. Oh my gosh, where does the time go? He was born in 2008, and I just had a big wake up call. And, there's nothing like your life shifting on its axis once you bring a baby into the world. And really it's everything that you thought you knew about yourself, like just now it's in the spotlight. Is it true? And I really had to confront what I thought I knew about myself. And I call that period my breakthrough moment. And I recognized that, there was a whole part of me that I wasn't attending to. And I didn't quite know what to do about that. But I had this massive epiphany, which I have no other way to put it than a divine download, because that's what it feels like. It's like, boom, it just hit. And I woke up, and the message I got was, Amy, you're going about this all wrong. It's not about figuring it out. It's about feeling it out. And the wisdom in that statement truly integrated into every cell of my body. It wasn't a conceptual thought. It was this deep, full body knowing. And everything in that moment shifted. And I saw that, oh my gosh, what we're after is a feeling, not a thing, a feeling, not a title, a feeling, not an amount of money. And so if it's a feeling that we're after, that we genuinely want, then why not follow the feeling? What feels right? What feels good? And so that's when I committed to navigating purely by inspiration. And it led me to very quickly, almost somewhat, it's really wild how quickly life just took off on this path of least resistance and into the path of most fulfillment. And I found the topic of transpersonal psychology, and whoa, that feeling, I was like, oh my goodness, I have to study this. I have to study it. My sweet husband was like, what are you going to do with this, Amy? And I'm like, I don't know. I just have to study this. He's like, are you licensed for anything? And I'm like, nope, I just need to go study this. And so I got my master's in transpersonal psychology, and it just, everything just clicked. And little did I know, and this is the beautiful thing about inspiration. It always tends to come to fruition after the fact, but little did I know that math and something like transpersonal psychology together lend itself perfectly to this field of coaching. And so coaching found me in 2010. And so now I've been doing this for over 10 years. And it is, I'll tell you, I live a miracle every single day to be able to do this work.
It's such an interesting journey that you're talking about, because on the one hand, you've, certainly, done this fantastic, educational journey, and you've put your logical brain to great use and you were very successful there. So it's counterintuitive to most people. It's quite intuitive what you tapped into, right? But
Yeah.
to make that shift, and you talk a lot in the book about that you, by feeling your way through, you get all of the extra kind of noise out of the way so that you actually can live a life that feels very fulfilling.
Yes.
Because it would have made sense for somebody to say, what are you thinking?
Yes.
Leaving this very successful career that you have worked so hard for and done so well at,
Yeah.
right? This more kind of, you said you're working in STEM and technology specifically, and to then kind of make this kind of huge turn
Yeah.
off. You really had to trust yourself.
Oh, it was 100% trust. And, and to this day, I still work at really honing that ability to listen and trust, because it's a art, and it's a skill, and it's a gift to be able to really discern between, is this me strategizing, figuring it out because this sounds like such a great idea and it makes sense on paper and it follows the formula where it's like, this is what we're supposed to do to have the good life. And because there's a lot of excitement in, oh, what if I take that job? And then, oh, then I'll have that title, and oh, and I'll have this. And so there's a lot of excitement in figuring it out oftentimes, because, it's the logical thing to do. And it's the admirable thing to do often. And so to really listen for that, the difference between that motivation versus this much deeper, oh, but this just feels right. And you can even notice how you talk to yourself. That sounds like a good idea. This feels right. That makes sense. This just totally lights me up. Right. And and it's really subtle. And it takes a lot to really listen. And I'll tell you, I still catch myself where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm feeling it out. And when in fact, it's actually, I'm figuring it out. And then it just bites me in the butt later. I'm like, all right, okay. Yeah. But it's enthralling though, to be able to listen to that part inside. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you're mentioning you have this degree in transpersonal psychology. And I understand that you just, referred to explaining to your husband that, oh, well, no, it's not something where you come with a license after. But what you talk about, what you've spoken about just now and in your book, is really a lot of what therapists would say with a client who is struggling, because you describe what I think is such a common phenomenon with people who are checking all the boxes and achieving all these things and still aren't happy.
Right.
And in fact, you use one example I think is just great about lottery winners and how much less happy they can be when they've achieved this thing that everybody would say, wouldn't that be amazing?
Right.
Same thing with getting a degree or getting a high paying job or making a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit more about that, how you discovered that for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I thought a lot about this when I was going through this transition about what is it that motivates us? Why is it that we do what we do? Why is it that we reach for what we reach for? And, when are we ever taught how to navigate this? And really, when you take a step back and you look at how we're conditioned and what it means to be a developing human in our society, you look at our educational system and you say, okay, well, we start in preschool and then in kindergarten, and we're told do these things, and then you get a grade, and then you get the accolades, and then it's this, and then it's that, and then pretty soon you're on this, do what you're told, get a good grade, and then it's all going to work out. And so then the whole narrative is, if you do right, if you do what you're told, if you do it right and you get the good grade, then you get into the good college, and then you'll get a good job, and then you'll get the high paying job, and then you'll get lots of money, and then you'll be happy. And it's not that we really say it that way, but we do say it that way. And that's everything that we are up to in those years. And it's largely driven by the word should. You should go do this. This is what you should do. And, I talk about should in my book because I think I genuinely believe that should is the worst word in the English language, because it represents such a false reality that there's some objective standard out there that if you follow that, the should reality, then you're going to live the good life. But that doesn't exist. And then we hold ourselves hostage to that. I mean, it's just wild. But we get so used to this that I think we deaden that ability to really listen. And so we put all of that trust in a system outside of ourselves that, okay, this is what's supposed to make me happy. And because now we witness what's going on around us and who's doing what. No, this is great. And now with social media, it's okay, well, I got to do that. Maybe I got to do that. Maybe I got to achieve that. And so we enter into what I call the conditional roller coaster. And it's the unwinnable quest where we're on this roller coaster of conditions where it's, well, let me just get this next thing. And let me just get this next thing. And let me just get this next thing. And then I'll feel at peace. And the thing is, it's just in that constant searching, we never, ever, ever, ever find peace. And there's so much to this conversation because it's in the nature of conditions themselves, right? So if we're saying, I need a condition in order to feel true peace, right? Then that our power is now outside of us. And the weird thing about conditions is if I need a certain condition to feel a certain way, well, for that condition to be in existence, I have to see the condition that's the opposite of that in order for this to be obvious. So, but if I see the condition that's opposite of that, that's going to make me feel not great. And so it's just this really interesting, again, unwinnable quest we enter into that's really exhausting. And for most professional folks who are ambitious, who are hyperachieving, who are goal-oriented, who are somewhat self-aware, I mean, we get trapped in this. And then we wonder, like, what is it going to take? What is it going to take to truly feel inner peace? And, it's, and then the false narrative is it's the next set of conditions. It's the promotion. It's when you finally run your own business. It's when you retire. And so it's something all of us are really used to practicing, and waking up to that is the big opportunity.
I'm laughing to myself as you're talking about this, not only because it is so universal, and I do think it's going to resonate with everyone, but you use very entertaining quotes that kind of get your point across even deeper. So I should you not. Don't let anyone should on you. And for anyone listening who's horrified, SHOULD, but, and we should on ourselves all the time. And, I'm going to tell me if this ties in well, because you also talk about things like imposter syndrome, right? Getting all these things, feeling like I'm not enough, not even just like it's not enough.
Right. I mean, imposter syndrome it's a fancy way of just saying it's a moment in time when we're entertaining this idea of self-lack, that we are not enough to receive the inherent worthiness and belonging, and that really is what it means to be human. And it's a really awful feeling. And you know what? It is so common. It is so common. And nobody likes to talk about it because oftentimes they think they're the only ones that contend with this feeling. And so that's something I focus on a lot with leaders and with professional folks. It's just how prevalent this is. And it's, that's a big conversation right there too.
So interesting. I feel like sometimes things are really just in the air, and you're absolutely right. Even super accomplished people who from the outside look like they have everything going on can have that feeling of, am I enough? And a few weeks ago, I had on Dr. Mario Bouquet, who actually was one of my former students and now is a social media mental health influencer.
Wow.
And she's beautiful, and she has like followers in the hundreds of thousands. So she's achieved things that most people in mental health specifically don't. But she was talking about being in school and feeling this sense of imposter syndrome as well. And I remember thinking, this is somebody I know, and I would not have thought that. And objectively, most people wouldn't think that. And you've actually worked with some huge names in tech and in other industries. And here you're saying people can get, to the top of the corporate food chain and still have that feeling.
It's, I mean, and you would be so shocked to hear about what that inner dialogue here sounds like, because it just feels so, yes, it is so prevalent. And again, we're not talking about it because there's this subtle sense of shame, like, I shouldn't be feeling this because they're okay, but I'm not. And it's fascinating. It is fascinating. It's a huge part of the transformative work, because really what this is pointing to, it's the relationship we have with ourselves. That's it. And imposter syndrome really is a belief of lack. It's, I believe I'm not good enough in this now moment. And that relationship with self, I mean, there's so much to this, because that relationship with self, if I believe myself to be not good enough in this moment, that's my relationship. And that self relationship forms the lens we look through out to the world, which brings color and meaning and texture and to everything around us. And so, we think we live objectively, when in fact, no, we're living through the lenses determined by this relationship we have with ourselves. And so if we want to catalyze true transformation, inner peace, growth for ourselves, it goes right to the heart of what is this relationship you have with yourself. And there's, again, it's for any of us that want to do good in the world, that are ambitious, that have dreams and desires to make the world a better place, and we have to work with others, you're going to bump up against these ideas. Oh my gosh, well, they're great, maybe I'm not. And so it's common, but to be able to look at this with full awareness and say, and it's just telling me something important about how I'm relating to myself, instead of feeling bad about it. Oh, I mean, it's an amazing opportunity. It's an amazing opportunity, but it starts with really just seeing it for what it is, and then being willing to talk about it.
Such a great bunch of points, because what most of us do is we flee bad feelings. And in fact, in your book, you talk about ways that resistance shows up. And I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, resistance. So I call this, inner opposition is that it's like an imposter syndrome. It's this feeling that we don't feel good enough on the inside, that I don't belong, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not whatever flavor it might take on. But it's this self belief of lack. And that right there, is a feeling. And you know what that feeling feels like. Have you ever had that?
I don't know of anyone who hasn't ever had that
right?
feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, when you ask yourself, like, what does it feel like? It feels like this hollow, kind of gutted, like, and it can feel overwhelming, but it's really subtle. And, what I talk about in the book is I've made a couple of connections about our neurobiology, and as it pertains to, what it means to survive and thrive as a human. And what we're not talking about, as much as I wish we were as humans, is this very real reality around rejection. Rejection is a fascinating topic to me that, again, I wish we were spending more time on this. And that's really why I wrote this book, because I find this to be so fascinating, that rejection as an experience registers as physical pain in the brain, which is unlike any other emotion. And when you really take a step back and look at the bigger picture, us as humans, when we're born hardwired to survive. And we are utterly dependent on our caregiver for the first couple of years of life. So when you think about the brain trying to keep you alive, the brain knows that, wow, well, if you're going to stay alive, you better get accepted by your caregiver. And so rejection to the brain is death. And that wiring doesn't change from birth until you pass on. And so you have to ask, like, well, what are the implications of this wiring that we have? And we know, and we it's I think it's pretty common knowledge that we're hardwired to be in connection with one another. We're social beings. We're hardwired for this connection and belonging. But we don't really talk about the flip side. Well, why? Well, it's because rejection is so triggering for us that it's painful. And so on a non-conscious level, we're doing whatever we can to avoid it. And that's what's fascinating to me, is the fact that it's on a non-conscious level. We're doing whatever we can to avoid it. So that's why negative judgment is something we do everything we can to avoid. And humiliation and hearing a no, putting ourselves out there. We're so hard on ourselves about, oh gosh, well, I was turned down, or I didn't want the no, or, oh, and the negative feedback. And there's so much in that. We have a visceral response to these things. And it's because it maps to this experience of rejection that on a non-conscious level, we're avoiding, like we avoid tigers and people with sharp knives. And so this is interesting because, well, now we tie in, well, what's this inner opposition about? Well, if I want to ensure that I am accepted by others, because that's life, because rejection is death, then I better do whatever I can to stay in good graces. And so in order to stay in good graces, I got to look out for the things in which I wouldn't be in good graces with others. So in order to do that, well, gosh, if I take on this idea that I'm not good enough, okay, well, then at least I can avoid certain situations in which might be super triggering, and I can prove myself in other situations. So it's a really interesting roundabout way we approach trying to stay safe. And I think that this is such a universal experience for most of us, that we take these negative self-beliefs on in order to stay safe from rejection, which is a little wonky when you think about it, but it's a fascinating predicament. And it's happening everywhere, at every level of any industry. It's happening everywhere. Yeah.
Oh, and it's so important that you're talking about that. Everything that you've said makes perfect sense. And, I was thinking back to in the book where you talk about some of the ways we kind of deal with that, where we don't realize that's what we're doing, but where we like avoid pain or channel our pain into something else by being really negative about other people, or procrastinating and things like that. And what you're saying is you're guiding people to kind of get in touch with their feelings, feel the reason why they want to do something. And it can help make better decisions. I mean, you were talking as an example, there's a little bit of a tangent, but in the book about even wanting to go back, we're thinking you wanted to go back and study physics, get a graduate degree. And what you realize is that when you tuned into the feeling, as much as it would have been, there are certain kind of sexy things about, getting another graduate degree, and something that most people are like, wow, that sounds really hard and impressive. And, it actually takes quite a lot more self-awareness and courage to say, I can do that, but I don't think that's actually what that's all about for me. And you actually pursued a different path that resonated with you so much more, because you didn't use achievement to avoid certain feelings or to gain approval, because that's the kind of conventional way we might just go about learning. And you learned on your own, and you studied something that maybe fewer people would be as familiar with, transpersonal psychology. And here, look at where it's brought you.
Yes. Oh, thank you for, mentioning that, acknowledging that, because that's absolutely right. And I love how you kind of tied that into this bigger topic here of inner opposition and rejection, because, on the surface, navigating via strategy versus feeling, it's like, well, how does this idea of inner opposition play in? And I love how you bring this in, because, at that moment, so this was, Aiden's an infant, and I'm I'm committed to following my inspiration. And by following my inspiration, I'm continually reading these physics books. And, the upside, having studied math, all things quantum physics, and those books make a lot of sense to me. And I really like them. And so I'm reading them and I'm diving into it, and I get this idea. Oh my gosh, I get it. I was actually meant to study physics. I'm going to go back and get my PhD in quantum mechanics. Oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Okay, I see why I studied math in order to do this, so I could go do that. And I got super excited about that idea. And I'm sitting there and all the energy starts running, but I could tell, and I didn't totally want to acknowledge it right off the bat, but I could tell it was really frenzied up here in my head. And what that was telling me, that I can see so clearly now, was it was the achievement part of me saying, ooh, if you do this, you're going to look really good. This is be a great feather in your cap, get a PhD in physics. Like, wow, this is going to be awesome. And so it was that part of me that wanted to prove, because all of us have this part of us that wants to prove, to stay in the game, because if we can prove ourselves worthy, then that's going to ensure our survival. And so that part of me that was really like, ooh, this is a great way of ensuring acceptance and belonging. And by the way, you like the topic, but I could tell just because of how it was up here. And if anyone's listening, and I'm referencing my head, it's like it's up here above my shoulders is the energy. It's not in my heart. And I really had to be honest with myself. And I thought, and I can tell by how I'm saying, as much as this sounds like a good idea, it doesn't feel like the path. And so it really took a lot of humility to say, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And it felt like I was disappointing myself on some level, but I had to leap so deep into the realm of trust. Like, okay, that's fine. But I know if I'm going to trust that something better is coming along, it's not this. Yeah. But I had to get away from needing to prove myself safe.
It's really huge. And I'm just looking at my list of a million questions and things for you. I want to segue for a moment into another topic that you touch on. That's of the importance of intention, interconnectivity, and synchronicity.
Mm-hmm.
And I really loved that for a million reasons. And we don't shy away from that here on this podcast, those types of topics here on this podcast. So it's especially exciting. Yeah. And you talk about interesting synchronicities that you had and how people can recognize theirs. But what I love about the fact that you included that is the picture, and I think that's what you've been saying all along, is the picture is so much bigger than any of the things going on for us in our daily lives in any given moment. It's not just the little silos that we think of ourselves in.
That's right.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about what led you to think about things in terms of synchronicity and interconnectivity.
Sure. Oh my goodness. Now there's so much to this amazing conversation. What's coming up for me right now is when I was about 5 years old, I maybe 5, I was very young. And I remember being in the backyard and I was just mesmerized by ants. I was watching these ants on an anthill in our backyard. And I think it must have been a transcendent experience, because I truly had this moment where I genuinely felt one with all of existence. And here I'm very quite young, but I think it was just having been in this somewhat, I don't want to say hypnotic state, but just watching these ants. And I was totally in this thinking of, what is their experience like? What is this as I'm watching them, with my awareness, watching them with their awareness, and it like zoomed out. And I saw this very holographic, somewhat nature of the universe. And it was truly, truly splendid. And it was then that it hit me on a full body knowing, not a concept, that there is so much more going on here than we could even try to capture or understand. And I think that's when I stepped into this very deep trust that there's something bigger and it's okay. And it didn't feel religious. It wasn't like, oh, and there's this thing called God. It was more of this an appreciation of the unfathomable nature of existence that we are living. And I saw and I experienced just how narrow and tiny, but important my point of perspective was. And so nothing but gratitude and appreciation. And I think that set the stage for recognizing that there's going to be stuff happening that I'm not going to be able to make sense of. And so if that's the case, then my job is to just appreciate and experience awe and wonder. And having decided to really witness this with appreciate the joys and the synchronicities, we can call them coincidences in life. Like I chose early on that coincidences weren't happenstance, that there was something in this, something meaningful, something wonderful. And I'll tell you, that's a choice. Is it a truth? No, it's a choice. And I'll tell you, it's a really good feeling choice to see that there is meaning within these coincidences. Feels so much more rich and delightful than if it was just happenstance. And so I choose to see it that way. And in that choice, I have recognized that it grows and it grows. And so now I see it everywhere. I mean, just last night it actually happened. And I was laughing with just last night, I was watching the moon. It was a full moon and it was supposed to be the blood moon last night. And I'm mesmerized by it. And we're just about to go to bed. And I'm thinking about something that, anyway, it was a delightful coincidence. And sure enough, I had to chuckle to my husband. I'm like, gosh, it happens all the time. These synchronicities, we must be plugged in all the time. It's just, and it feels so good. It feels so good. But again, it's a choice. It's a choice to view it this way.
Yeah. And I want to get to the topic of choice more in a moment. Mm-hmm. You're talking about synchronicities made me, I forget I hope it comes to mind. I might be having a senior moment, but there's an example in the book that, it made me think of, the various synchronicities I've had. I'm going to give you an example because the example in your book reminded me of this. And I remember this has to be like 10 plus, maybe 15 years ago. I was talking to somebody. I was in, downtown Manhattan, I think on like 19th Street or something. And this woman I knew, hadn't seen in a million years, had no contact with, popped into my mind. And she was significant in that we'd worked together. And, I had very fond memories of her. And I brought her up out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. I go out onto the street. And again, I'm way downtown in Manhattan. And this person worked up at 168th Street, farther west. And for people who aren't Manhattan people, like that might sound like, well, what's the big deal? But, this would have taken like an hour subway commute and some walking and whatever. And I literally got out of the building, walked out of the lobby, and this person passed me on the street and we stopped. And it had been years since I'd seen her or spoken with her. And I mean, that's quite a coincidence. Yeah. The synchronicity part is thinking like, is there some greater meaning to this, to this coming up in this interaction? And, there's lots of different ways to look at it. But what I think is nice about how you wrote about it in the book is that it's actually it's not only okay, but important for people to start paying attention, because it's like, when you were talking in the book about your own journey, I was thinking, oh, you're stepping into the flow. It sounds like you're really encouraging people to step into the flow, pay attention to what they notice in their thoughts and their feelings in the world around them. And as they do, and as it sounds like this happened for you, things just started to align.
Magically.
Yeah.
Because almost comically. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I'm thinking, I'm going back to your physics moment for a second, because you would have had one kind of path, and that would have been a perfectly wonderful path if you had pursued that PhD in physics. I don't think there's many wrong paths, but by choosing this very non-traditional path that resonated with you and paying attention to what you noticed and you're coming into your awareness, you actually have reached, I would say, far more people with your work and made possibly a bigger difference. I don't know.
Oh,
But
I love that so much. Yes.
So I think you were stepping into the flow. And when you talk about synchronicity, that's what that makes me think of. So, again, hats off to you, because most of us, that's been trained out of us by the time we reach adulthood.
That's right. Oh, I love how you say this. And yes, and that is stepping into the flow is the opposite of following the formula. Right. And I referenced this a couple of times, but we're trained to follow that formula, do what you're told and do it right and get the good grades. And we train ourselves away from listening to what feels good. And we are convincing ourselves to do what we think is right. And but when we start to really listen for what feels good, then all of a sudden the world around us starts to illuminate, like it lights up. And we start to see things we wouldn't normally see. So these coincidences, these amazing, delightful synchronicities start to emerge. And if you pay attention to them and you really honor that and follow it, it is truly the path of least resistance to the most abundance. And this is when I say it's almost comical how just delightful the flow and where it will end up taking you. I'll tell you, when I made the commitment to feel it out and not figure it out and really step into this wisdom, I mean, the synchronicity after synchronicity after synchronicity, I mean, it was just mind blowing. And it still happens almost on a daily basis. It's today, not at a massive degree, but it's a way of navigating, and it just feels so good.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
You talk about 5 distinct choices to help people feel free and whole and at peace. And you've been talking about choice. It's been a thread woven through our conversation. I'm wondering if you want to talk about some of those choices and how that ties into living on purpose, which really is not only the title of your book, but the essence of what you've been really encouraging people to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. The book captures 5 deliberate choices. You can also consider them as perceptual shifts that we choose to make in order to step into our own authentic life and living it's a way of living our best authentic life. And what these choices are, it's as a collection, they work amazingly on their own. They are fantastic. In the book, I present it in a bit of a logical order where it kind of builds on each other, but we could start at any step and it kind of all works out. But the way I present it, it kind of builds and makes more logical sense. See, that's the math major in me. I'm like, let me present some logic here so it's easier to understand. And so, the first choice is to feel it out. Don't figure it out. So everything that we've been talking about here, it's about getting off this conditioned way of going about life, trying to achieve happiness by attaining a thing. And what is that? And so the moment you really integrate the wisdom in that and you start to navigate via feeling and synchronicity and insight and inspiration, then all of a sudden you start to realize, and the second choice is, there is no way things should be, right? And so when you recognize there is no way things should be, like, wait a minute, okay, so then that formula is false. And there's so much in that conversation. So where, this is where the big word should pops up in this choice. There is no way things should be. Like this idea that there's an objective world out there we have to align to, it doesn't exist, but yet we hold ourselves hostage to that. So when we wake up to, okay, wait a minute, if there is no way things should be, then there's just the way things are. And then there's the way I want them, but it's just the way that they are. So I touch upon the nature of resistance and how when we push against reality, it actually keeps us negative. And there's just, again, so much there. And then once you really start to see there is no way things should be, then it's much easier to step into this trust that it's always working out for you. It's always working out. And that it's, it's where, and this one can be a tough one for folks because they're like, no, it's not. That when my, pet tragically died, that wasn't working out for me. I'm like, so this is a big conversation because what I mention and what I talk about is I'm like, okay, look at the nature of reality here. We live in this reality that requires duality. Like I cannot have up without down. I cannot have light without dark. I can't have birth without death. I cannot have sadness without joy. There's a duality here. And so, because of the formula, I think all of us become entrained to, we want to believe that growth is linear and growth only happens in the light. But growth happens equally in the light and the dark. And in fact, I think we grow the most in the dark, just like a seed. You got to plant it deep in the ground in order for it to be in, dark, stinky soil in order for it to turn into an oak tree. And so there's this duality. And so for us to push against the stuff of life and not, you see it as the fertilizer that it is, it really just holds us back from living our best life, living on purpose. So that's the third choice. The fourth is my favorite. Well, all of them. I love all of them. But the fourth is so important because this is the one that really unlocks freedom. And it's the choice to know that you're already whole and complete. And I'll tell you, Dr. Stein, I mean, that just sounds like such a cliche for most people. It's like, all right, I'm already whole and complete. But
it's true.
I propose that really there's a lot going on in here that we realize and make a strong argument for why that's true. And the moment, and here's the thing, you just have to choose to know that that's true, because the moment you try to prove it, you're never going to reach it, because that's that whole thing we're talking about, conditions. That's where the fifth choice comes in, which is you have to choose to know, not believe your worth. So those two kind of work together. And this is so important. And the difference between knowing and believing is profound. And when we get what freedom comes with the choice to know versus choice to believe, that's when there's a massive unlock. And that's when we live objectively instead of at the mercy of conditions and trying to navigate and stay safe. And so all of these together work wonderfully well. And then, you could open up any chapter and it's to whatever choice you're in, and it kind of works on its own, but it's, it feels magic to me.
Now, they're really great points and choices to make. Amy, I'm wondering, is there something that we haven't covered that would be important for us to cover? So I know there's a lot in your book.
So much. Yeah, there is. Gosh, there's so much. It's, we kind of touched upon this, but I love to focus on the importance of this, but
sure.
It just makes it easier to think about. But, all of us, we all want to feel good. That's just what it all boils down to. We all want to feel good. We want to feel whole. We want to feel meaningful. We want to feel purposeful. And we want to feel a certain way. And I think that we lose touch with that really what we're after is a feeling state. And we become conditioned that really what we're after is a thing. Like, okay, well, let me get my schedule under control so I've got more time. Okay, sure. Well, let me work harder so I can get that bonus. Or let me, start making these moves to start my own business. And it's like, yes, we want those things, but really what we want is the feeling we think we would have as a result of having the thing. And we lose touch with that ultimate endpoint. And we put all of our focus on the thing. And as we attempt to achieve the thing, and we have forgotten about what it's really about, we will start navigating in such a way that we start to forsake the feeling because we think it's all about the thing. And, for this book to really click and make sense, it's important to recognize that that is just the truth. All of us are after a feeling. So if it's that we're after a feeling, then listening to what it is that we feel, honoring what it is that we feel, honoring how something makes us feel, what it is we want to feel, like that is such a rich, amazing first step. And I get a lot from folks, well, I don't know how to feel. I've deadened my ability to feel. I don't think I can feel my emotions. I don't. And so there's a lot to talk about in that regard. And at the same time, this amazing thing about being human is that we do have feelings and we do have a desire to feel good. And so the first step to live on purpose is to really just acknowledge this at such a basic fundamental level. And right there, when one begins to just acknowledge that it's pretty amazing how all of a sudden things start to illuminate, kind of click and starts to make sense. So I would say very basically and very simply that the invitation really is at that very foundational level.
Oh, that's wonderful. Amy, I'm really enjoying reading your book. I have so enjoyed speaking with you today. Your book, again, for everyone, is Living on Purpose, 5 Deliberate Choices to Realize Fulfillment and Joy. It comes out May 24th, which is right around the corner. Yay.
Yes.
Where can people get your book and how can they learn more about you and your speaking and your coaching and so forth?
Absolutely. So my website is alwaysonpurpose.com. And I have a lot of information about what I do in the world and articles and references, resources and speaking and all that fun stuff. So alwaysonpurpose.com to learn more about me. My book is on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. It's going to be available where all books are sold come May 24th. But if you want to pre-order now, Amazon's probably your best bet. And however, I did hear that a couple folks have shared with me that Barnes and Noble started shipping them. So I'm like, oh my gosh.
Oh, wow.
So, like, how did that happen? So depending on how eager you are, you can do Barnes and Noble or Amazon. And then lastly, I love LinkedIn, and I'm not very much on the other social media platforms at all, but LinkedIn I do really appreciate. And my handle is Amy Eliza Wong, and Eliza is Eliza. Yeah, Amy Eliza Wong. But so thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming.
Okay.
So
amazing.
Thank you again for coming, Amy. So nice to meet you. And this has been another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And please remember to like, share, and follow. And until next time, be well.